to shield Hua Cheng with the array and couldn't be distracted. And Pei Ming posed not a single threat to the weapon that he shared such peculiar familiarity with. Just then, they suddenly heard Ming Guan curse. "You bloody savage! Can you not smash when I'm smashing? You've hit my hand." However, Como completely ignored him. Seeing that there was friction between the two, Shilin grabbed hold of Pei Ming. "General Pei," he said, "Como won't believe you mean him no harm and will keep coming after you. Quick, press the fingers of both your hands together, cross your wrists above your head, then press downward before opening your arms. This is the gesture that his people use to ask for a truce. Either way, just show him your goodwill and make him stop for now." Pei Ming was bewildered. "Huh?" he asked. "You must know that the resentment between Como and Ming Guan isn't just a small misunderstanding. How can it be pacified with just some hand gestures?" But Shilian paid him no mind and grabbed hold of him. "Come, do this with me to make him stop," he said. However, Pei Ming's hand was injured, and with this grab, the corners of his lips twitched. He was about to follow as instructed, but Ming Guan had already heard everything they said. He charged in front of Como, then crossed his hands above his head and slid his arms down before opening them. He smirked at the two in the circle, saying, "As if I'd let you." Yet unexpectedly, when Como saw that gesture, his eyes bulged and thick lines of veins popped on his iron dark skin. He opened his palm and swung his hand like an iron cattail leaf fan, sending Ming Guan flying through the air. The moment that slap swung out, both Pei Ming and Ming Guan still hadn't wrapped their heads around what had happened. It was only a moment later that it dawned on Pei Ming, and he turned to Shilian. "Your Highness," he said, "I thought Ming Guan was already cunning, but I hadn't thought you to be more cunning than he is. I'm impressed." Shilian wiped away his cold sweat. It's nothing. Much ashamed," he said. That speech just now appeared to be said for Pei Ming, but it was actually said for Ming Guan. After Ming Guan heard, in order for them not to do as they willed, he would of course fight to show goodwill to Como first. However, the gesture Shilian taught wasn't for calling truce in the first place, but instead for provocation. And it was the most insulting kind of provocation in the Banyue tongue, something akin to chop off your bitch head, f your wife, murder your whole family, level your ancestors' graves. 4 power attacks all at once. How could Como not be outraged after seeing it? Under any other circumstances, Ming Guan might have been suspicious of the truth in Shilian's words, but because the situation was dire and Pei Ming's arms were almost raised, Ming Guan didn't take the time to think carefully and fell into this deception. Ming Guan quickly snapped out of it after Como sent him flying and wanted to remedy the situation, but because they couldn't communicate and his instinctive reaction was to yell, it looked more like he was cursing Como. He also tried a few other hand gestures, like a thumbs up. However, this was no different than someone who just used the most malicious, vulgar swears to abuse you, suddenly turning around and showing goodwill to beg for mercy. So it didn't seem sincere at all, and he got pounded a few more times for the effort. On top of that, Como also knew some rough Midlands curses, so he swore as he struck, and Ming Guan was becoming a little irked too. The two of them were beating each other harder and harder. Pei Ming almost wanted to cheer them on. Ming Guan swept a glance over, incredibly irritated. He suddenly reached out and waved in front of Como. Then he pointed at the other two before doing that forking hand gesture again. Como actually did stop and asked with a frown, "Are you doing this to me or to them?" Xilian became apprehensive but didn't dare speak recklessly because he couldn't be sure how to best coax Kermo. Seeing that there might be a way to turn this around, Ming Guan exerted more effort and turned to Pei Ming to repeat the gestures savagely. But when he turned back to Kermo, he turned calm, matching the expression in his eyes and doing this repeatedly. Kermo finally understood what he was saying. They had the same enemies. Once they were unified, Ming Guan and Kermo came charging at the array once more. Xilian's mind spun rapidly. He inhaled deeply and yelled at the top of his lungs in the Banyue tongue. "General Pei Jr., Banyue." Hearing those two names, Kermo stopped abruptly in his steps and demanded sharply, "Are they close by too?" Xilian didn't answer him, only focused on continuing his call. "General Pei Jr., Banyue, Kermo is here. Don't come over. Hurry and run away, and don't come back." Yelling like this, Kermo naturally thought that those two were actually nearby, and Xilian was telling them to flee. Kermo was instantly enraged. "As if I'd let you," he shouted. Then he rushed away. "Oi, big guy, what are you running for? You must be lying. Come back," Ming Guan said. However, Kermo was long gone. Ming Guan stomped his foot in anger. "Dumbass," he yelled. Xilian wiped his cold sweat away for the second time, his heart grateful. Learning another language is infinitely beneficial for life, he thought. Seeing Ming Guan was about to continue attacking Fang Xin, he raised his hand. "Stop, keep this up, and we won't be so courteous." "And how are you courteous to me now?" Ming Guan countered. "Did you forget something?" Xilian asked. "Forget what?" Ming Guan said. Pei Ming was about to speak, but stopped. Then dragged an object out from behind him. "How can you forget such a big thing?" he asked. What he was dragging were the two legs of that body's lower half. The moment Ming Guan saw, his expression froze. "Huh? My lower body," he shouted. Earlier, he had been using palms in place of feet, using his arms to prop himself up and jump around. He seemed to have gotten used to moving this way without realizing it, completely forgetting that he hadn't yet retrieved his lower body. While he and Kermo were fighting, Pei Ming took the chance to leave the circle and drag that deserted, immobile lower half into the boundary. Pei Ming threatened, "You better not do anything unnecessary." Only this threat was obviously very awkward. If a hostage was a complete person, Pei Ming could very well sink his fingers into their neck or skull when making the threat, and the picture would appear much more effective, like he wasn't bluffing. However, right now, they only had the lower half of a body in hand, so where could his hands go that wouldn't be awkward and could still strike fear? Pei Ming couldn't think of a way, so he simply stepped onto the leg. "Are you shitting me?" Ming Guan said. Xilian also didn't think that this looked serious at all, and said courteously, "General Pei, stepping on legs really isn't convincing. Can you maybe make him think you've got him by something critical?" "Your Highness, don't say something like that so easily," Pei Ming said. "If it wasn't because I refused to do something so classless, you'd think I'd want to step on his legs. Why don't you come grab him where it hurts?" In any case, neither of them were willing to grab that kind of critical place. "Never mind," Xilian said. "Then why don't we do this?" After huddling, The two of them each grabbed onto one of Ming Guan's legs. Now this looked more threatening and unawkward. Please back off, Xilian demanded. Otherwise your true body might suffer some breakage. However, Ming Guan sneered. Ha! Did you actually believe my lower half is useless? Just as he finished, Xilian sensed an aura of killing intent that was rapidly increasing. He instantly tossed out the leg in his hole. General Pei, watch out, he said. That seemingly dead lower half-body suddenly swung out its two legs and kicked without warning. Pei Ming also threw out the limb in time and avoided being struck by those swift legs that churned up blades of wind. Those two legs flipped themselves around in the air and landed with a single knee to the ground. Then they slowly straightened and stood upright. The moves were clean and impressive, and Xilian praised in spite of himself. Nice. But then he immediately changed tune. Not nice, he said. Not nice indeed. The protection circle he had so arduously created was made for the purpose of keeping Ming Guan out. But now things had certainly become complicated. Even though Ming Guan's top half was still outside, his lower half had come in. Pei Ming also realized this and uttered, "We've been had." Ghosts and demons with their true bodies split in half. Some could only move with one half leading, and some could move both parts at will. They couldn't determine which breed Ming Guan belonged to, but that lower half of his body had been rigid like the dead, unmoving even when stepped on, so Pei Ming had thought him the former. It seemed he was only pretending not to move. Ming Guan was clapping in mirth outside the boundary. That's right, he said. This is what they call inviting a wolf into your home and catching turtles in the pot. As for the three in the circle, Huachang had his eyes shut, meditating, facing a critical time. Pei Ming's sword had long since been broken by Ming Guan, and Xilian's Fang Xin was acting as a lock to their protection array. The two had no weapons in their hands. Without any other choice, Xilian called, Ming. The scimitar Ming, who had been lying on the ground like scrap metal, instantly stood up and flew into Xilian's hand. Xilian gripped the hilt and slashed. Ming Guang's lower half-body raised a leg and kicked. It blocked the strike, but it was pushed back a couple of steps, almost falling out of the boundary. The upper half of the body watched from the outside, his expression faltering, looking rather wary. He clapped his hands, and that lower half-body returned to its true form, a verdant pinnacle sword of nearly 3 feet, boiling with killing intent as it hung in the air. Xilian didn't use scimitars often, but Ming was agreeable in his hands. He was about to charge when Pei Ming spoke up. Your Highness, I'm not trying to cause trouble at a time like this, but your Hua Changju seems to be having a little bit of trouble. Shocked, Xilian whipped his head around. Sure enough, Hua Chang's brows were even more tightly knitted, and the hands making seals that rested on his knees were also shaking. The moment Xilian was distracted, that broken verdant blade instantly seized the opening to lunge. Yet at the same time, Ming slipped out of Xilian's control on its own and loudly blocked that broken sword in the air. Xilian called, Ming, please hang on for a bit. Then he crouched down in front of Huachang. Why is it like this? He asked. What went wrong? Don't look at me, Your Highness, Pei Ming said. I'm not as familiar with the Ghost King as you are. Xilian called out to Huachang. Sanlang, can you hear me? Don't endure any more. Come out. Just then, Ming Guan shouted from outside the circle. "A little blade dare block me?" During the exchange, the broken sword Ming Guan and Ming had already parried countless times within an instant, making sparks fly. If this was the usual scimitar Ming, it would obviously gain the upper hand. Yet now, before the long sword of Ming Guan, the shrunken Ming really did look like a child getting beaten around by an adult. Although vicious, since its limbs weren't long enough, it was restricted. There were a few instances that were fairly close, and Shilian spared glances while keeping his focus on Huacheng. "Watch out," he called. After he called out, Ming suddenly flipped and flashed, becoming a streaming silver whirlwind, and successfully struck the broken sword. Ming Guan, outside the circle, awed. It seemed that hit wasn't a light one. Shilian praised. "Good, Ming." Pei Ming suddenly spoke up. "Wait, Your Highness. I think when you complimented it, it grew bigger." Shilian looked closely. "Really?" he asked. "Seems like it," Pei Ming said. "Why don't you try again?" "It was only some praise, no big deal," so Shilian said. "Very well, Ming, listen closely. You are handsome and carefree, cute and kind, clever and intelligent, gentle and determined, number one in the world." He trailed off, then stopped. Pei Ming started clapping soundly. Outside the circle, Ming Guan had a face full of disbelief and was crying furiously. "What kind of wicked spell is this? How come I've never heard of it before?" Indeed, with every praise Shilian sang, Ming's body grew a bit longer. If earlier it was said to look like a 10-year-old child, then now it was a youth of 14 to 15. That broken sword facing the now-grown Ming was now in trouble. It could only move awkwardly left and right, whereas Ming was growing swifter and more unpredictable. With the results of the match growing more obvious, outside the circle, Ming Guan made a hand seal. The moment Pei Ming saw, he instantly called out. No good. He's transferred all of his spiritual power into that lower half. Sure enough, the black aura surrounding the body of that blade blew up. When Ming struck, it was bounced away by that black aura and plunged slantingly into the ground. Shilian immediately pulled it out. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Don't worry. Watch this," Pei Ming said. Then he took Ming from Shilian's hands. Shilian was still puzzled when he suddenly felt cold on his skin. Pa! Pei Ming had tapped the scimitar on his face, and the hilt coincidentally pressed against his lips. Shilian removed Ming from his face. His lips had been slightly numbed by the taps, and he rubbed at them, baffled. "General Pei, is there any meaning to your actions?" he asked. "Of course, it's very meaningful," Pei Ming said. "Your Highness, please look down." Shilian looked down and was instantly speechless. Ming had grown even longer. Ming Guan really couldn't hold back anymore. He yelled from outside the circle. "What the fuck? And what wickedness is that? You might as well use all your tricks at once." "Truth be told, I also want to know what's caused this," Shilian said. Full of spirit once more, Ming leapt to its feet and lunged toward Ming Guan, the broken sword. One sword, one scimitar, they battled relentlessly in the air. Shilian went back to check up on Huacheng, and Pei Ming watched Ming Guan, who was bent over not far away. Right now, all of Ming Guan's spiritual power was transferred to the lower half, currently battling Ming. So the threat of his upper half body was greatly lessened. Everyone was conscious of this, and Pei Ming moved in to take him down. However, another series of heavy footfalls came running. It was Kermor who had returned. He cried furiously, "You cunning Midland cultivators, you lied again. Go collect junk for the rest of your life. They weren't nearby at all." Shilin hadn't expected to keep Kermor away for long, but he seemed to have returned earlier than expected, and right at an inconvenient time too. Ming was overjoyed, and he pointed at Fang Xin. "Big guy, quick, knock that sword over. Once the array is broken, the ones inside will be helpless." He hadn't needed to say anything. Kermor swung his hand down to chop, and Fang Xin was knocked over 2 more inches. Another chop, another 2 inches, another chop, and Fang Xin fell. The protection array was finally broken. That broken sword stopped fighting Ming and flew out of the circle, returning to Ming Guang's side. It transformed into 2 legs, stitching itself back into a complete body. Ming Guang leapt to his feet and patted Kermor. He pointed at Pei Ming, then pointed at himself, pointed at Shilian, then pointed at Kermor. Kermor understood. This meant that they were splitting the prey. He nodded, his iron-like fists cracking as he walked towards Shilian, who was still blocking in front of Ho Chang. Ming Guang, on the other hand, worked out his legs as he smiled savagely. "Pei Ming, are you going to snap me in half again? Come give it a shot." Pei Ming didn't speak. Ming Guang sneered. The sword-snapping general, the general who snapped his sword. What a beautiful tale, that such a thing could become a beautiful tale. It's obvious the world is blind. "I never took it for a beautiful tale," Pei Ming said. "Bullshit," Ming Guang spat. "You know full well just how many you've killed, brothers and subordinates who followed you for so many years." Meanwhile, Kermor had also drawn close to Shilian. Shilian gripped Ming tight. He wasn't afraid of him, but he was worried something would happen to Ho Chang if he was careless. Kermor saw his eyes were unfocused, like he was thinking, and said, "No need to think of any more cunning tricks. I won't be deceived by you anymore." "I wasn't lying to you," Shilian said. "Ban Yue and General Pei Jr. really were in this area earlier. It's just that after I informed them of you, they fled. Hey, Ban Yue, why are you here?" Kermor raged. "Do you take me for a fool? A dumb trick like this?" Yet before he finished, a voice rang from above him. "Kermor." That was said in Ban Yue tongue, and it was a very familiar voice. Kermor instantly looked up and was faced with a large bundle of something wine red falling from above. His face instantly dropped, and he hugged his head as he roared, "Go away!" What came falling down was that poisonous serpent, born only of the kingdom of Ban Yue, the scorpion snake. And the one who threw them out was naturally the Guosha of the kingdom of Ban Yue. Ban Yue leapt down from the tree and landed next to Shilian's side. "General Hua," she greeted. Shilian turned to Kermor. "I told you, it was really Ban Yue." But Kermor wasn't listening to what he was saying at all, and only roared at Ban Yue. "You threw at me. You threw the scorpion snakes at me. You know I hate the scorpion snake, but you still threw them at me." Ban Yue crouched down and said, "I'm sorry, but I only know how to throw scorpion snakes." Ming Guang noticed that the situation was shifting and was alarmed. "Who's there?" he yelled. A black, shadowy figure leapt down from the tree and obstructed his path, answering. the former Deputy Marshal Guard, official of the Palace of Ming, Pei Su. Miracle soldiers had come from heaven, and Pei Ming was dumbfounded. Little Pei, how come you've come too? Shilian, on the other hand, asked, Banyue, weren't you following Lord Rainmaster? Hearing the name Lord Rainmaster, Pei Ming slightly knitted his brows. Banyue replied, that's why this time we've come following Lord Rainmaster.